us. I'm Michelle Carter, Director of Third Rock Essentials, and I'm here with Guerry Grune, CEO and founder of Third Rock Essentials. Hi, Guerry. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks. So my background is I'm a chemist and have a doctorate, Ph.D. in chemical engineering. And the reason that Third Rock Essentials started out as Third Rock Sunblock, but it started because I also surf. And so I was concerned about two 20-year-old kids that were surfing with me. Both of them were told by their dermatologist that they could continue to surf, but they'd get melanoma again. So this was back in the 90s. And what happened was I decided to try to solve that problem by developing sunscreens that were truly effective and would prevent melanoma, carcinoma issues from coming back.
Very good. Definitely a good reason to get into sunscreen. Saving lives is always important.
Yes.
So speaking of people and their lives in general and sunscreen and the importance of that in your life, could you tell us a little bit about some of the myths that are out there with sunscreen and especially SPF?
Right. So SPF is sun protection factor, and sun protection factor is something that people definitely should be concerned about. But SPF only has to do with one portion of UV light. It's UVB. And there's both UVB and UVA, as well as a little bit of UVC that comes from sunlight naturally. And it turns out that UVB, which is what SPF is based on, has to do with the smaller, well, not shorter, but not smaller, but shorter UV rays. And those shorter UV rays are what causes high energy bursts that cause you to burn. So in the presence of the sun, for you or me or someone who's lighter skinned, 15 to 20 minutes is about what it takes in pure broad daylight without any clouds in the sky for you to start to turn pink. Well, protecting yourself from UVB and turning pink is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's sort of a false sense of security. Where what I mean by that is UVA, which is the long penetrating rays, those are the ones that do the DNA damage, aging, wrinkling, and eventually skin cancer. So SPF 30 for 15 to 20 minutes in the sun, 30 times 15 is 450, 30 times 20 is 600 minutes of protection from UVB. So this plot right here shows UVB in the short wavelengths. This is wavelength, this is absorbance, and this is UVB light. As you can see, once you get above about 320 nanometers, it's where UVA takes over. And those are the long penetrating rays. So what you'd like to have is a high SPF product, which is also a UVA absorbing product, so that you're getting protection from not only the short high energy burst waves that cause reddening and sunburn, but also something that also protects you from the long penetrating rays, which cause DNA damage and eventually mutation of the cells, which can lead to skin cancer. It turns out that SPF, sun protection factor, is something that you can develop a formula for, many formulas for, that can be as high as over 100, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking care of any of the UVA rays. So sun protection factor is really hiding the ability for your skin to turn red, and that's a good thing, except the problem is that it's also not only a little bit misleading, but very misleading. You can still absorb a lot of UVA light and have a problem with that. The other thing is, if your skin is starting to burn, what that really means is you should get the heck out of the sun. And so by having 450 minutes, if it takes you 15 and you have SPF 30, or 600 minutes, that's 10 hours in the sun. There's no sunscreen out there that's not going to start to break down in the presence of 10 hours of sun. So you really have a false sense of security, and the SPF value is what it is in the bottle. When you put it on your skin, it changes. So there are a lot of things about SPF which the FDA regulates, that really aren't very helpful in keeping people safe in the presence of the sun.
So, in choosing a sunscreen, as you mentioned, SPF is something that people do look for, but it is more important to have a UVA blocking, a high wavelength UVA blocking sunscreen.
It is. If you have a choice between SPF and UVB and UVA, the choice would always be UVA because you want to protect yourself from those long penetrating rays. In fact, the FDA with their new monograph in 2011, I say new, it's old now, but it was 35 years before they issued a new one. And from 1978 to 2011, there wasn't a monograph that was changed. And in that monograph, they do say that if you don't have UVA protection, you're supposed to put a warning label on. But that's all they do. They don't say how much UVA protection you should have or from what component of the sunscreen that UVA absorption should take place. But UVA certainly is a much more dangerous ray, if you will, or set of rays or wavelengths of light than UVB is. That doesn't mean UVB doesn't cause damage. It's just that UVA causes more damage.
So in formulating a sunscreen, you choose your inactive and your active ingredients. When trying to formulate a sunscreen that is going to be beneficial in both UVB and UVA, what are some of the active ingredients that you would choose to go with?
Well, there's a choice, and of course, we've talked before about avobenzone, which is a good UVA absorber. The problem with avobenzone is it breaks down in the presence of light. So UV light will cause avobenzone to fall apart, and you won't get the same UVA absorption and protection that you would with, for example, zinc or titanium dioxide. So the mineral sunscreens certainly are more stable, and they do absorb UVA light in a more stable way, meaning that they're going to last longer on your skin. They're going to last longer in terms of in the presence of the sun, and you're going to have more absorption with titanium and zinc oxide than you will with the avobenzone for UVA.
In choosing a mineral sunscreen, there are the two actives that are the go-to actives, the titanium dioxide and the zinc oxide.
Right.
And the combination of the two.
Right.
In working with mineral sunscreens, what have you found to be the best active ingredient?
Well, the combination of TiO2 and zinc oxide, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide, will give you a relatively transparent product, which from an aesthetic standpoint, people don't want to turn white in the presence of the sun or put white stuff on their skin. So the combination of the two is effective aesthetically. Unfortunately, TiO2 in the presence of UV light, there have been some scientific studies which indicate that TiO2 also can provide some toxic substances when it breaks down in the presence of UV. So that really leaves zinc oxide. But zinc oxide has several different forms, and we can talk about that too. Zinc oxide alone is still the best UVA absorber. And if you use micronized or even nano-sized zinc oxide particles, you'll get some reflection of the UV light as well as absorption. So it's sort of like a sponge and a mirror. And you'd like to have both of those, and you'd like them to be stable.
And in your experience, zinc oxide is the more stable of the mineral actives?
Yes, of the two, zinc oxide certainly is preferred over titanium dioxide in terms of stability and in terms of the absorbance characteristics. Again, if you look at absorbance, you'll see this green line across the top here. That's what you really want. That's actually a zinc oxide absorbance spectra. And it goes all the way from UVB to UVA, all the way up to about 400 nanometers in wavelength, which will give you a lot of protection in the presence of the sun.
And that green line is an actual sunscreen in comparison to some of the commercially available organic sunscreens that have non-mineral actives.
Right. Well, actually, the plot here shows these are actually mineral active sunscreens. They're just made differently. But it's a good question. So these mineral active sunscreens are better absorbers than the organic sunscreens, which have the avobenzone, the oxybenzone, the methoxycinnamates, the salicylates. those organic sunscreens are going to decompose very rapidly in the presence of the sun. And with the exception of avobenzone, they don't have any UVA absorption. They absorb in the UVB spectrum only, which means they give you high SPF values, which we talked about before, is a little misleading.
Talking about the actives, that's one part of a formulation. The other part of a sunscreen formulation is the inactive ingredients. Mm-hmm. Based on the availability of certain sunscreens right now, they're mostly an oil and water formulation.
Right.
Can you tell us why you would not choose to use that type of formulation, and what would be a better formulation that you would choose to go with?
Well, so you've touched on the fact that all sunscreens that I have ever been involved with before I formulated my own, all sunscreens are oil and water based. And of the oil and water, 70% is water and roughly 20 to 30% is oil and some other components. So the problem with oil and water based products is that they separate. So if you go to the grocery store and you buy salad dressing, for example, you see that oil and vinegar don't mix, and you'll actually see separation in the salad dressing bottle. Well, there's two things that cause that. One is emulsion or emulsifiers. So the emulsifiers are either too weak or there's too much salt. And the salt actually causes the emulsion to fall apart. So there's two reasons why oil and water salad dressings fall apart. The emulsifier is not strong enough, or the salt's so strong, there's so much of it, that it breaks the emulsion. And of course, it takes time for that to happen. Well, the same exact thing is true for sunscreens. You have an oil and water composition. You have to put an emulsifier in there to keep them together, or otherwise they're not going to be shelf stable. And if they're not shelf stable, they're also not going to have efficacy. So if they don't have efficacy, that means they're not going to be very effective. They're not going to work. And that means their shelf life is going to be very short. So if you buy a sunscreen product, you want it to last a few years probably, because you may put it in, your kitchen cabinet or whatever. You bring it out, you're ready to go to the beach or whatever you're going to do in the presence of the sun, and the product's not any good anymore. So that's a big problem with oil and water-based personal care products overall, and especially with sunscreens, especially mineral sunscreens. They're going to fall apart more quickly because the zinc oxide and the titanium dioxide are heavier components. They're going to sink to the bottom, and you're going to be left with a layer of oil and water at the top. And that oil and water at the top, unless you mix it back up again very well, isn't going to be very effective. So there's all kinds of problems with oil and water emulsions, and that goes in spades with sunscreen.
Oil in itself as an ingredient does stand the potential to go rancid. Can you explain some of the effect that would have on your sunscreen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are the mineral sunscreens we talked about. Zinc oxide being probably the one that you want to have either be the highest active ingredient that you have, or the only active ingredient you have. It turns out that, as you mentioned, oils go rancid. Well, yes, very easily. And oils, when they go rancid, they become acidic, more acidic than they already were. Some oils, like carrot oil, for example, already has a pH of 3 to start out with. So it's just going to go down from there. So pH, of course, meaning that the neutral pH is 7. Anything below 7 is acidic. Anything above 7 is alkaline. And it turns out that all sunscreens are acidic, because they start out with water and oil. So not only is the oil that goes rancid over time acidic, but it's true also that the water becomes acidic because deionized water or distilled water or pure water, which might be from reverse osmosis, all those waters bring carbon dioxide from the air into the water and cause the water itself to become acidic. So the pH of most sunscreens is somewhere between 5 and 6, usually around 5.5. So getting a sunscreen product that you can actually make alkaline also will do another thing, is it'll prevent the zinc oxide or titanium dioxide from becoming zinc hydroxide or titanium hydroxide. What does all that mean? Well, it turns out we're going back to the salad dressing again. If you have a salt, it breaks the emulsion. If you have a lot of salt, it's going to break the emulsion faster. Zinc hydroxide and titanium dioxide, which becomes titanium hydroxide, those become salts. Those are salts. They don't start out as salts, but in the presence of an acidic solution, they become salts. So that's a problem in terms of keeping the sunscreens together. That's again going back to the whole emulsification system and the fact that rancid oils start that process along. And again, you'd rather have something that if it's going to have an oil in it, it's going to be an alkaline-based compound rather than an acidic-based compound, especially when you're dealing with the mineral sunscreens.
When reviewing some of the ingredients of sunscreens, especially the inactives, there are a lot of things that get put into sunscreens that may look like a natural or a healthy ingredient that in turn out to have toxicity. Can you explain some of the reasons that may happen and how that can affect you by using that sunscreen?
Well, it's a great question. So we also were very concerned from the beginning about not only the toxicity of the organic sunscreens, and we haven't really talked about endocrine disruptors or female mimicking hormones yet, but it turns out that there are female mimicking hormones in the organic sunscreens themselves are female mimicking hormones. That was discovered in 2001 by Margaret Schlumpf, who is a toxicologist at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. And she wrote an article describing this problem. So initially, we developed a non-endocrine disrupting, cytoprotective, immunoenhancing sunscreen complex that doesn't have any of the issues. The way she determined this was she lathered female rats with the organic sunscreen components, the methoxycinnamates, the salicylates, the oxybenzones, etc. And what she found was that the female rat's uterus grew abnormally large. And that was her test for endocrine disruption. Well, in reviewing this and researching the issue regarding actives versus inactive components, it turns out that the inactive components, also many of them, are female mimicking hormones, organic substances that are mimicking female hormones, which are endocrine disruptors. And that turns out to be things like myristates, parabens, propylene glycol, some of the salts. These are all components that are toxic. We would prefer to have something in as the inactives that are food grade edible that are non-toxic substances. So when you're mixing up the sunscreen, you're mixing actives with inactives, you're bringing those components together, and what you're trying to do is create something hopefully that's non-toxic for the skin. Specifically because in the presence of the sun, what you want to do is you want to build your immune system. You don't want it to be compromised in any way. So the endocrine system will be disrupted by endocrine disruptors, and if that happens, your immune system is going to become impaired in the presence of the sun, which is the biggest free radical generator on the planet, and having free radicals generated on your skin is not a healthy thing. So all of the toxic components that go into sunscreen should be eliminated to keep you healthy in the presence of the sun versus somehow depress your immune system.
And it's not only to keep ourselves healthy, but it's also to keep our environment healthy.
Right.
So in formulating your formulation, I know you've chosen each one of your ingredients specifically for food grade edible and non-endocrine disrupting and the cytoprotective immune boosting properties that they present to the formulation.
Right.
If you're using a organic sunscreen or a mineral sunscreen that has a toxic ingredient, which may not seem toxic at first, but like you said, in a degradation process or in combination with some of these other ingredients, that they can transfer that degradation into the environment and that toxicity, causing effects that we're seeing now with things such as coral bleaching and the killing of the reefs.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to formulate a sunscreen that would actually feed the reef instead of killing the reef?
Well, I think you know a lot about it. So the answer is yes. And, we've been able to formulate without using oil and water, without making it acidic. We've been able to formulate using glycerin instead of oil and water. Glycerin is a long chain sugar. So glycerin actually will feed the living organism. The reef as most people don't realize, is a living organism. And what happens is that living organism has to reproduce over and over and over again, living organisms, plural, millions, if not billions of them, on a daily, hour by hour, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis. That's how the reef continues to grow and live. When you take away the ability for that to happen, which some places like Hawaii and Key West recently and other parts of Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, those folks are concerned that the female mimicking hormone components for sunscreens, both the actives and the inactives, may in fact somehow retard the growth of the living organisms which create the reef. And I think there's a lot of scientific evidence now that proves that, and they're starting to ban those substances for the reefs. We certainly have developed formulations which would eliminate that problem, and in fact actually maybe boost the ability for the organisms to have food in the presence of the sun. Of course, phytoplankton are some of the organisms that are consumed by these coral building organisms, of which some of them are helping build the coral reef, and of course some of them die and build the coral reef by dying. But in any case, what you want to do is you want to encourage the growth of these organisms so that the reef can grow and not die. When you see pictures of reefs that are dead, you see these dark brown sections, large sections of the reef, and the question is, well, why is that happening? Well, I'm not sure it's all because of human activity on the reef, but if you're a scuba diver and you're covered with, sunscreen that's female mimicking hormone stuff, yeah, that's going to get into the water, and certainly it's going to interfere with the reproductive systems of many of these organisms.
So I know the mantra of your company is, if you wouldn't put it in your mouth, why put it on, or wouldn't put it in your mouth, why put it on your skin?
Right.
And as you've always said, your reef, or your skin is your largest organ.
Right.
So if you had to leave this talk by giving people a good summary of what to take away, what to, in the end, pack into your beach bag, what would you give them?
Well, so to answer your last question first, in your beach bag, you'd want something that would be preferably an alkaline product, that would be zinc oxide based, that would be stable, so that you'd absorb all the UVA you possibly could, and you do it for as long as you possibly could. So certainly you would want a higher SPF product, at least 30 or above, so that you can spend hours in the sun without getting damaged. But you want to make sure your UVA capabilities are very high. So a zinc oxide based mineral sunscreen, preferably one that's alkaline, preferably one that doesn't use oil and water, preferably one that's in something like glycerin or other way to somehow stabilize the zinc oxide. The second thing you'd want in the bag probably is pure aloe, in case you do get burnt, so that you have immediate relief. And the other thing I'd recommend is you'd want something like we make an itch block product. I mean, something that would be similar to this, which was basically calamine lotion like product. This is also an alkaline zinc product, which will have immediate relief when you have jellyfish stings or a bee sting or a mosquito bite, and you're outside and you want immediate relief. That's something that's going to cause immediate relief because it's alkaline and your skin gets very acidic. Getting back to your initial point, your skin is your biggest organ. So people don't realize that your skin's an organ. It's like a sponge. It brings stuff in, but it also has to perspire or somehow allow things, mostly toxins, to come back out again. So you want to protect your biggest organ, and the way to do that in the presence of the sun is you want to do it using primarily alkaline products that are stable rather than acidic products, which are mostly unstable.
All right. Well, thank you, Guerry, for giving us the good summary and lots of great information on sunscreens and what we should be looking for.
Thank you.